We are travelling through a series at the moment. We've kind of put our main preaching series in a book of the Bible, that's Numbers, on pause for a quick 4-part topical series that we planned earlier in the year. It's called Non-Negotiable, or Non-Negotiables rather, there you go. And it's a series where we're looking at things that, not the non-negotiable doctrinal core of the Christian faith, but some clear implications of that core that are given to us very clearly in the Scriptures. Many of these have been fairly controversial subjects in their own way. We've looked at euthanasia, we've looked at abortion, we've talked about religious liberty. Today, we're talking about kind of a second part of what we started last week. So last week, we talked about sexuality and marriage. And probably the main thing that we saw there was that marriage doesn't just exist for the sake of marriage, right? I hope you walked away having heard that. Our small marriages are made to reflect the reality of the one true marriage, the marriage of Christ and his church. There is a glorious purpose and power in the marriage relationship when we seek to live it out as an expression of gospel truth, as a reflection of the good news of Jesus' love for his people, the church. And this week, we're going to be talking about family. And I want to start by saying two potentially controversial things before we get to the main bulk of our sermon. I'm not usually a preacher who gets up and says, hey, I'm going to say controversial stuff today. I like to think. But when we should say it, we do say it, and we don't back down from saying it. I think that's a healthy norm in a church. First, as much as the Bible does invest great and glorious purpose and meaning in the marriage relationship, it places at least equal significance and value in the relationships of parents and children. And I think that first one's been emphasised pretty heavily a lot of the time in the church, and often the second one has been a bit neglected. Second, although our culture in Australia has done a very effective job of degrading the importance of marriage, it's been no less effective, perhaps more effective, I would say, in degrading our view of family and of children in particular. Even setting aside the glaring issue of abortion, which, once again, if you want to look at that, just go back in the podcast, listen to the sermon we did on that, the active killing of a child by their parent before they've even been born, which, says something about our view of children, doesn't it? But even setting that aside, consider for a moment this picture of our country today. The statistics show that we are a country that, by and large, are desperately keen not to have children. We are waiting a lot longer to have kids than any historical period. Quite transparently, we do that because we think other things are more important. We have to sort out other things first, or I need to figure out my career first, or whatever. In Australia in 1981, now, 1981, you'd say, is not like the peak of conservative values in Australia, but it's just in the past, right? In 1981, 15% of first-time mums were 30 or older, right? 15%, 30 or older first-time mums. Does that make sense? In 2017, it was 49%, with another 31% born in the late 20s. In 1981, the highest period was in your early 20s. Now, obviously connected, households are smaller today. It's a thing. The average Australian household, right? So not the average Australian family, just taking any household. The average Australian household was 4.5 people in 1911, and compared that with 2.5 in 2020. Did you know that in 2021, when immigration was ceased for basically the whole year, due to COVID and lockdowns and border closures and things like that, Australia basically didn't grow at all. Like, you look at a growth chart of Australia and it's moving fairly steadily until that year, and then it goes to 0.1% growth that year and then back up the next year. The reason for that is because we actually get more new people in Australia via immigration than we do through birth. I had to read that stat a few times to get my head around it. As a country, we don't we just don't have kids. I mean, we do have kids, but we don't have kids like we ever had kids before. When we do have kids, we wait a long time and we don't have many kids, typically, as a country. This is kind of the accepted norm today. Another way of saying that is that in the early 20th century, our family with 5 kids would have been kind of below average in size. We would have been a small family. And these days, we're often treated as like, whoa. Like I maybe 5 times a week, let's say on average, I get the, wow, 5, whoo, response. Most people don't do the little Michael Jackson there, but aside from that. And as a country, we're not just desperately not keen to have children, we've built our whole system around not really seeing the kids that we have a lot of the time. Childcare, love or hate it, childcare is just categorically the handing off of the most important and vulnerable years of connection with a kid for every child, right? In Australia today, you can start your child in childcare. When do you think you can start your child in childcare? Call it out. Just give me a loud response. Hey? 6 weeks, halfway to 3 months. You can start your child in childcare at 6 weeks for 12 hours a day. Up to. It's wild, isn't it? At that age, that means that you're basically just seeing them sleep well and wake up lots of times. But, or maybe you're just seeing them awake and the childcare centre's just seeing them sleep. I don't know. But what does that do to a person if they don't see their parents for the first 5 years of their life? What does it do to a country if all of the kids in the country don't know their parents? I can't imagine healthy things, and I won't have to imagine for much longer. Amongst 1-year-olds in Australia, 2 out of 3 are in some sort of childcare. Right? Just so you know the extent of that. This isn't a sermon about the evils of childcare. I just want to give you an idea of how our country approaches children and family today. 1-year-olds, 2 out of 3. Now, say what you will, but compared to a time when one parent stayed home to look after the kids, and this happens for economic reasons, it happens for personal reasons, it happens for all kinds of reasons. But when you compare a time when one parent stayed home to look after the kids, one clear message here is that mum and dad have more important things to do, right? Whether that's because they actually have to go and earn money because our culture has set up a place where you have to have 2 jobs to survive, or whether it's just done out of optionality, it says that mum and dad have more important things to do. And into all of this, the Bible speaks with staggeringly, gloriously countercultural truth. And we need to hear it, because it's been very easy for the world's take on kids and family to just bleed into the church all over the shop. So what I want to do today is simply lay out 3 biblical truths about family. And if you love alliteration, this is going to tickle you. Family is glorious. Family is a gift. Family is a gospel context. Okay? Needless to say, as with all the sermons in this series, and basically all the sermons ever actually, there's so much more we could go into on this. We're not going to hit all of it today, but we're going to, maybe we'll come back and do a whole family series at some point or something. But just before we dig straight into this, let me first quickly say to anyone in the room who doesn't have kids, and maybe people who have no prospect of having kids, or maybe, your kids have long grown up, I make a commitment to you today. This whole sermon is going to sound wildly irrelevant to you right up until the end when you find out that the whole thing was for you. So stick with me, okay? Cool. But for now, our first truth. Family is glorious. What I want you to see here is that having a family, being a parent, is a high and a normal calling. high and normal. It's glorious. In a world where children are often treated as an inconvenience to the life that I want to live, to the important things that I want to do, the Bible clearly holds out this countercultural truth. Parenting is a glorious business. Let me point something out to you here that is probably so drop-dead obvious if you've ever read any of the Bible that it's possible you just glossed over it. You know, whilst our marriages are a picture of the love that exists between Christ and the church, parenting, and specifically fatherhood, is the only human relationship that is a reflection of the relationships that exist within the triune God. You ever consider that? There is so much that could be said from our reading today, like I said, from John 10, but I want to just hone in on that one thing. Jesus doesn't call the first member of the Trinity boss. He doesn't say, I and the boss are one, or I and the manager, or I and the prime minister, or even I and the king are one. He says, I and the Father are one. The Father is in me and I am in the Father. And when, you know, in John's Gospel, by the way, around about 120 times, Jesus calls God his Father. And when Jesus was baptized, of course, the Father's voice speaks from heaven and says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Says basically the same thing in Luke 9 when you get the transfiguration and God says, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Now let me suggest something here. The point is not, I don't think, that the first member of the triune God and the second member of the triune God have a uniquely special relationship that they couldn't find a human relationship to express. So they just picked the nearest thing, father and son. That would still put a pretty enormous amount of significance in parenting, wouldn't it? If God looked at the world and said, what's the nearest thing to the relationship between God the Father and God the Son? Well, father and son, I guess, that's near enough. But I don't think that's it. Rather, the God who designed everything, designed the relationship of parent to child to reflect the inner working of the God of everything. He gave us this thing to reflect that. We are made to have children so that we might, in a limited, dim way, reflect the love and the joy that exists within God himself. Isn't that breathtaking? Doesn't that make this the most significant job? No other relationship can say that. None, not a one. And not only that, but when a person is saved, they do not just call God king, although we do call him king. We don't just call him leader, though he is our leader. We don't just call him boss, though he is boss over us in a real way. He is, at least in a sense, all of those things. But what does Paul say in Romans 8? You did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. Which is like, I've heard people connect Abba with maybe daddy. I think that's a little bit American. I think in Australia it's just dad. The Apostle John, he writes in 1 John 3 verse 1, see what kind of love the Father has poured out on us, that we should be called children of God. So parenting is intended to be a picture of the love between the Trinity and a picture of the love of God for his people. How incredible a privilege. What a high calling, right? And let me give you one more thing. One more way that the Bible makes parenting a high calling. Mums, you might have been feeling a bit left out at this point because we've been talking a lot about fathering and father. Consider this. Bearing children is the first hope that is given to Adam and Eve after the fall. Do you do you know Genesis 3, right? If you don't, it's okay. I'll explain a little bit. Genesis 1 and 2, right? God creates a perfect world, sets up a perfect garden, and who does he put there? Who does he put there? Well, Adam and Eve, yes and no, right? Yeah, it was a trick question, and I pulled you into it non-optionally. Until the end of Genesis 3, it's Adam and the woman in the garden. All right? When he first sees her, remember in Genesis 2, he says, she shall be called woman. And that's all that she's called until the end of chapter 3. In Genesis 3, the snake tempts Eve, and she and Adam sin. Adam delightfully stands in the background as the worst example of a husband ever, followed by all the rest of us, of course. Sin enters a perfect world, though, and they are driven out of the presence of God, but not before God tells them how hard it's going to be now. But even as he tells them, even as he says, cursed is the earth, and even as he curses the snake, he offers hope, because he says to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. So, right, children. So it's one offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And this is the first promise in the Bible that a Saviour will come into the world, and see how he will come here. He will come as offspring, right? He will be the woman's offspring. He could have come in any way he wanted. The funny thing about retrospect is it's just how it happened, right? But he could have done it any other way. God could have chosen to come, just descend from heaven. But he didn't. He chose to come through the bearing of children. And by the way, what's the very next thing that happens in Genesis 3? God finishes what he's saying, the curses, if you will, and the very next verse, before they're sent out of the garden, before God gives them animal skins to wear, the very next verse is, the man called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. And many Bibles will include a little footnote there to let you know that Eve sounds like the Hebrew word for life giver, which is to say that the first woman is named in hope for the fact that she will have kids, and from that will come the Saviour of the world. Wow. What a high calling parenting is. And here's the crazy thing when you consider that. When you consider how high the calling is, parenting is not a high calling which God says some, just the most holy, excellent, and wonderful people should pursue. It is a thing that he gives as a normal gift to the vast majority of humanity, the ability to have children. There's so much we could infer from this, but here's one really obvious thing. Don't treat children as the thing you have to get done in order to get back to the thing you really want to do. That would be such a waste. Such a foolhardy thing to do. I'm not saying God doesn't have purposes for your career or for your volunteering or for anything like that, but understand, children aren't the obstacle to get past. And actually, that's what makes sense of our second truth. I wanted to share from the Bible today. So we've seen that kids are, family is glorious. And let me ask you, if you were to summarize our culture, not the church culture, but the country's culture, its approach to family and especially to kids today, give a short one-sentence review, I wonder what you would say. Kids are an inconvenience, I think, would be a fair summary of Australian approach to parenting. Maybe kids are hard. Now, there's some truth to that. Sorry. Kids are hard. But consider, what good thing did you ever do that wasn't hard? Think about it. When a young doctor sets out, or a young prospective doctor sets out in their medical degree, or when a person sets out to work their way from the bottom to the top of a Fortune 500 company, or when explorers used to go out into the world, set out in their ship to cross the oceans, find the North Passage, whatever. In none of those situations does the person set out doing that thinking, you know what, this is going to be easy, isn't it? Cakewalk. No, they know it's going to be hard, but they do it because they think it'll be worth what is achieved through the hard work they put in. So many of the best things are hard. If you were to summarize the Bible's teaching on kids in like that same sort of one sentence, family is, kids are, I think it would actually acknowledge the challenge of it, but it would emphasize kids are great. Family is a gift. What does the Bible actually say about this? Let me read to you. This is from Psalm 127. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed how most people would describe parenting. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. Now, let's acknowledge, not everyone can have lots of kids, okay? There's a whole variety of reasons for that. I don't want to make anyone feel bad for that, and we've all grown at different stages in our faith. We've all got different things that have happened at different times in our lives, and I want to acknowledge that. But nevertheless, do you see the Bible's take on this? Do you see the image? Don't run into battle with just one arrow, right? Like is kind of what's being said. If you can avoid it. Some people can't avoid it. Better to have one arrow than have no arrows. We saw last week that God's intended context for sexuality is in the commitment of marriage between one man and one woman for life. We add to that this now. There we go. God's intended context for children, and there might be a connection there, I'll leave that one with you, but God's intended context for children, his intended context for children is in that same marriage relationship. Every child is a gift. We should say, even though his intended context is the marriage relationship, we must say every child is a gift. No child should be treated as anything but a gift. Even if they're born in difficult circumstances, even if sin has happened that resulted in the birth of a child, or the conception of a child, the child is always a gift. Why? Well, on one hand, because there are just so many benefits to having children. Let me convince you that having kids is actually a gift to you. Just through empirical stuff, through stuff I can tell you, that there are social benefits to having children. When you have, when you get old, it is good to have a mob of kids who you have loved and who can care for you. I would take that over professional care any day of the week. There are emotional benefits. If you engage at parenting as a gift rather than as a curse, rather than as an inconvenience, there is so much joy in parenting. Struggle too, don't get me wrong. If you're a parent who's like, I'm really struggling, I'm not saying there's something wrong with you. There are really hard days in parenting. As with the medical degree, as with the Fortune 500 company, as with the ocean crossing explorer. There's struggle, but it can be such a joyful thing. The joy of watching your child take first steps. The joy of watching them strum a guitar for the first time, stomp around the lounge room being silly, achieve great things in their life, embrace faith in Jesus, the joy of the wedding day, There are scarcely words to describe these joys. Do you know medically there are benefits to being a parent? Fun fact. Let me be a medical nerd for you here and tell you something that I bet 95% of us don't know, and the other 5% got told by me. Did you know, because this doesn't get promoted, did you know that studies, large studies, right, legit studies in legit medical journals, not like backwater John kind of poked something and hoped for the best, did you know that studies have shown that every time a woman gives birth, it reduces her relative risk of breast cancer by 7%? And every year that she breastfeeds reduces the relative risk of breast cancer by 4.3%. So, like, add that up, right? Suppose you have, let's just say, 5 kids. Nice round number. And you feed each one for, let's say, 2 years. By the end of that, your relative risk of breast cancer has reduced by 78%. Anyone ever tell you that? That sounds like the sort of thing you should get told, right, if you're having kids. It's not that old information, so there's that part of it too. But that is to say, relative risk, you might be hearing me say relative risk and being like, he's just being medical and like it's not real risk. It's a 78% less than the general risk of everyone else. So like, suppose every woman's got 10% risk of breast cancer, 7.8 of those 10% are gone. You're on 2.2% overall. Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm nerding out. Now, not every woman can breastfeed. Not everyone can do it for that many years. Not everyone can have that many kids. But it's still noteworthy, right? Isn't God an incredible designer? Didn't he design children as a gift? You know, why don't we get told these sorts of things more? I don't know. Could it be because the world doesn't want you to see children as the gift that they are? But of course, there's a deeper level at which children are a gift, right? Everything that we said in the first part, everything that makes them parenting, family, glorious, makes children a gift. They're given as a reflection of the relationship of the Trinity. They're given as a reflection of God's love for his saved people. They're given originally as a way by which salvation would come into the world. Parents, listen, parenting is tiring. It is. It really is. I'm not going to pretend it's not. I got woken up every hour on the hour from like 3 a.m. just the other day. And that wasn't like, wow, this is a really hard, that was just Thursdays, right? It's tiring. But don't believe the world when it says that children are an inconvenience. Don't absorb the world's way of thinking about family. See these little people, or some of them quite large people, as a heritage, as a gift, as arrows in the quiver. And the weariness and the challenges will be worth it. Now, one more truth to bring out. We've said family is glorious, family is a gift, family is a gospel context. In fact, let me expand that a little bit. Family is a central context for gospel ministry. In the book of Ephesians, we get a short paragraph on how the gospel is lived out in the parent-child relationship. Paul says to children in Ephesians 6, 1-3, he says, kids, you listening? He says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Now, kids, as with parents, you are not called to obey if your parents call you to sin. But beyond that one parameter, God has called you to respect, to honor, and to obey your parents. And it gives you a promise. This is actually good for you. This is actually a blessing to you. And it's actually a way that you show the world not just that you obey and honor your parents, but that you obey and honor God. That you're one of his children. You have opportunity when an old part of you says, no, I want to rebel. I don't want to do what mum and dad have said. You have an opportunity to honour God by honouring your parents. Did you know that? You can glorify God in your day-to-day lives in this way. Parents, listen to what he says to us here. And Paul speaks specifically to fathers, I should say. But I think that as a father leads, this will become kind of the work of both parents. He gives this one verse, Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Yes, dads, the Bible has our number. Do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now, I reckon a lot of people read that and think, okay, discipline and instruction, that means I have to be really good at telling them off when they do something wrong. That's just not what it says. It's certainly not all of what it says. What those words mean is bring your children up in the Lord. Point them to Jesus. Instruct them. Train them. Training is in view in that word discipline. When they every day, when they stuff up, when they do well, when you eat breakfast with them, when you get them down to bed, train them in the Lord. Train them in what it means to know God. This means taking them to the Bible, leading them in prayer. This means training them in what it looks like to walk in godliness. This means demonstrating godliness to them. So, for instance, parents, isn't it so easy to expect your children to apologize when they do something wrong? And isn't it so hard to apologize when you've stuffed up in your parenting, when you've spoken too harshly, when you were selfish in some way? When you know you were the mistake, when your wife, and this is just a hypothetical, okay? But when your wife says, kids, who did this thing? And you have to maybe be like, yeah, it wasn't the kids. It was me, hypothetically. Yeah? It's hard. And they need to see that. This looks like sharing the gospel with them. Not as a one-off conversation, but as a thing that permeates every day and is the central part of their formation as a person. Disciple them, this means. I went to a funeral once where an old fella had died. Christian guy, to the best of my knowledge, Christian guy. And when one of his kids got up and gave the eulogy, he spoke he spoke a lot about his love for cricket and his love for his work and his love for his children. He'd in so many ways lived out implications of the gospel. And the only words he said about his faith were his faith meant a lot to him, that he never made a big deal out of it. And as far as I know, all of his children aren't walking with the Lord, and all of his grandchildren as well. This last week, our beloved brother in the faith, the oldest member of this church, who's just had the best church upgrade ever, Bob, was promoted to glory, like we've said. A couple of weeks before that, I was down at Melaleuca Court and at the nursing home, and I asked Bob how I could pray for him. And his answer moved me. I loved this. He said something to the effect that he wanted to be used by God to witness to the other people in this nursing home. I also, on the same day, I think, asked him what his favourite song was. And he said, I'd have to think about that. On Wednesday this week, I had the privilege to visit Bob twice down there. First time, there was a whole bunch of family there. It was, the awkwardness of a big room of people. Second time, he was a bit out of it. But before I left, I just let him rest. I decided to just chuck that question in there one more time. I said, hey, Bob, what's your favourite song? And again, he surprised me with his answer. He gasped out the words of the whole verse of a song. He said, stand up for Jesus, you soldiers of the cross. I don't know it as well as he did, so I'm going to have to read it. Lift high his royal banner, it must not suffer loss. From victory unto victory his army shall he lead, till every foe is vanquished and Christ is Lord indeed. On Thursday morning, I sat down with Mark and we were able to share a moment of gratefulness for having been given good dads. Great dads, really. Dads who raised us up in the faith. It's such a powerful, meaningful ministry when parents, when mum and dad raise their kids up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, and specifically when they are active in sharing the good news of Jesus with their children, when it's in every part of life. Parents, raise them up in the Lord. Do not practice a private faith. I mean, have your faith behind closed doors as well. Don't get me wrong there. But faith in Jesus is just not, it's not a thing that just exists behind closed doors. It can't just be a private thing. If you were the only one with access to life-saving medicine in great abundance, you wouldn't keep it private, right? You wouldn't say, this is good for me, but I'm not going to share it with you. What an awful thing to do. Faith in Jesus is not private. Jesus is the medicine that the world needs. And Jesus is more than anything you can give your children. More than a proper education, more than a roof over their heads, more than food on the table, Jesus is what your children need from you. Take them to Jesus proactively by teaching them to read the Bible and praying with them, by singing songs of praise with them, even if you've got a rubbish voice. I tell you what, Bob did not sound like a professional singer on Wednesday. But it was just about the most beautiful singing of a Christian song I've ever heard. Charles Spurgeon is widely quoted as having said, God does not regard our voices. He hears our hearts. And if our hearts do not sing, we have not sung at all. So let your heart sing with your kids, even if your voice sounds like a cat's being strangled. Your kids don't need to hear a great singer, is my point. They need to hear that their mother and their father are moved by the love of God. I have two short things left to say, and we're nearly done. Sorry, I know this has been a bit of a whopper. First, I said at the beginning that if you don't have kids, and perhaps you never will, or perhaps they're all grown up, that this whole sermon would seem irrelevant to you right up until it didn't. Well, here we are. We're at the end. And do you know what? The Bible actually takes a great deal of what's been said today about parenting and invites you into it as well. Invites all of us to live it out. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, right, who was, to the best of our knowledge, never married, never had kids, had lots of gifts, said that parenting, singleness was a gift that he had. Paul writes 3 letters in the New Testament to young leaders in the church who he has raised up, 2 to Timothy, 1 to Titus. And do you know what he calls those guys? To Timothy, this is 1 Timothy 1 verse 2. To Timothy, my true child in the faith. To Titus, my true child in a common faith. Within the church, within the family of God, there is a great deal of room for a person to have many parents in the faith. There are many in the world who have not had faithful, godly parents. There are many here who have not had faithful, godly parents. There are many who are far from their parents. There are many whose parents are godly and at hand, yet who still need other people, other parents in faith who also contribute to the discipleship and growth of their children. To this we are all called, to raise up as disciples the children of the church. So there you go. It's all for you. And now my final thing to say. Perhaps you've heard all that I've said today, and perhaps there's a bitterness to it for you. Perhaps your parents were not loving examples of godliness. I had a friend once, a long time ago, whose parents had abused him when he was young, and not so young actually. And the thought of God as Father, the first time he walked into church, we were talking about the parable of the prodigal son, not in our night church here, by the way, and the thought of God as Father repelled him because his experience of a father was so negative. But over time, he came to see that God was the good Father that he had never had. And that God invited him, not his abused child, but his beloved son. He invited him to be his beloved son in Christ. And God makes that same invitation to all of us. And this is the beauty of the gospel, is that even if your parents are rubbish, and let's be honest, parents, we're all a bit rubbish at times. Sorry if you're the perfect parent, but you're not. God invites us to have the perfect parent, though. And by faith in Jesus, if you've never put your faith in Jesus before, you can be, it's not just a transactional thing. It's not just a come to Jesus, get rid of your sin, have heaven. Hooray! Those things are all true, but they just completely miss the point. You can be a child of God and come into the love of the one perfect parent. If you've not yet trusted, let me invite you, he invites you to be his child today, to trust in Jesus and know that you have a perfect Father who loves you. He loved the world so much that he sent his only Son. He invites you to trust him today. With that, I'm going to pray for us. So would you pray with me? Jesus, we thank you that you are the perfect older brother. That you came and you died according to your plan from before all time that you and the Father and the Spirit made. You carried our sins so that we could be children of God. And so we say, Father, Dad, thank you for what you've done to save us. Lord, I pray for anyone who hasn't trusted in you here, that today they would. That today they would be able to say, I am a sinner. I have run. I have been against you, God, and yet you have always been for me. And so I trust in what Jesus has done at the cross to pay for my sin. I turn from my sin and I trust in him. I pray that they would be, and that they would know that they are a child of God today. And Lord, I pray for all of us. I pray specifically for our families, that these kids would grow up in the Lord, that their parents, families would be diligent in raising them up as disciples of Jesus in the gospel. And Lord, I pray for your fruitfulness in response to that faithfulness, that they would trust and believe and be saved. Let us be open and outright with our faith. And I pray for all of us that we would all be so conscious, so powered by the Spirit in raising up the children of the church. And I pray that you would be bringing in many more children parents, families, single people, older people, younger people, into the love of the Father. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.